Well, regulating the banks remains top of the agenda, and we're lucky enough to be able to speak to Michel Barnier. He is the EU Commissioner for Internal and Market Services. Mr. Commissioner, thank you very much indeed for joining us today. Now, after France and Germany and many of the banks rejected the idea of ring-fencing what are called the market-making elements of the banks as proposed in the Liikanen report, have you now rejected the idea?
D'abord, j'observe que le débat reste ouvert.
First of all, I observe that the debate remains open. You talk about France. The bill proposal from the government is known, but the debate in the Parliament is just beginning. We're talking here about the separation of the management of risks within banks to protect. And that is clearly my stance. The consumers, the savers, the taxpayers. Managing differently, balancing differently, preventing in a specific manner the risks within banks. That's a necessity. That's why I asked Mr. Liikanen to do his report with a lot of important people, experts, and he delivered the report. We are now working on each of the options that he suggested and others. I am also monitoring what's going on with the Volcker rule, with the Vickers report, with the French law, and we will present during the summer a proposal for a European rule for the banking sector.
Et nous présenterons au cours de cet été une proposition de règles européennes pour le secteur bancaire.
Now, there are elections next year, and of course your term as Commissioner ends as well. Do you think it is reasonable for you to be able to propose and enact legislation during this actual term of watch for you?
Ma réponse est oui. Je vais présenter ce texte cette
My answer is yes. I will present this text this year around the summer. The legislative work is not over. It will continue until the beginning of 2014. And considering the importance of that last piece of the good regulation of the banking sector, there's another issue that matters to me in a complementary sector, that is shadow banking. I think the Parliament, like the Cabinet, will be committed to legislating quickly.
Can you give us an idea of what you think of the health of the European banking system today? Because exactly today we've been hearing about a Dutch bank, SNS Reaal, being bailed out.
Nous savons bien qu'il y a encore aux Pays-Bas, on l'a vu, en Espagne, dans d'autres pays.
We know that there is still weakness in the Netherlands. We've seen it in Spain, in other countries of Europe, some weaknesses in the banking sector. But I think the right decisions are made sometimes in an emergency, as we see in the Netherlands, sometimes in the long term or in the medium term. And that's why it is urgent to complete the agenda of regulation. The Basel rules for the good capitalisation, the liquidity, the prudential rules, the banking supervision at the European level, at the Eurozone level, the resolution of banking crisis. All this is on the way, and we now must finish it quickly.
Can we turn our attention now to the ESM and this link between sovereign debt and bank debt? Is there any way in which, or a preferred way in which we can separate these two?
D'abord, le mécanisme de solidarité, de stabilité européen est en place. C'est un progrès.
First of all, the ESM is in place. That's progress that has indeed been acknowledged by all the savers, the investors, markets, as one of the elements of the confidence that is coming back. Another element is that of supervision. The ESM has its own rules to decide what it has to do, towards which banks it has to intervene. To sever the link between the public debt and the banking crises, the key is clearly to complete our agenda of regulation and also to complete the mechanism of resolution of banking crises, so that the taxpayers do not pay for the consequences of certain crises or certain mistakes, and that the banks pay for the banks.
Can we move on to the transaction tax now? Only 11 countries have signed up to the tax rule. Are you not worried that countries, or banks in particular, will just start to move their trading platforms to different places where these rules do not apply?
Non, je ne le crois pas. D'abord, j'observe que
No, I don't think so. First of all, I note that in a lot of countries, including those that do not want the transaction tax, there already are taxes on banking activities. Here in London, there is a tax on banking activities of another nature, but it exists. So each country keeps its sovereignty on fiscal matters, but it does not forbid 11 countries, maybe more, to agree on a single tax of a very low rate on a very wide basis, regarding banking activities and financial transactions. And so I think it's a tax that's economically tolerable, that will not provoke a backlash, but it's also politically and morally just, considering all the taxpayers have had to pay to safeguard the financial system after the crisis.
A final question then. You're here in the UK, you've given a speech at the Mansion House today. What is your message to the UK regulators and to the banks? Is it important that London should remain right in the heart of things, or is the risk that they might become sidelined?
C'est aux citoyens britanniques de choisir lorsqu'ils seront consultés.
It's up to the British citizens to choose when they will be consulted. There are 2 or 3 things that I am sure of. The city is a very important place for the UK and also for Europe. It's an opportunity. The city is the main entrance point for investors of other regions in the world into the single market. 40% of those investments go through the city, and so the city has to be at the heart of the single market, not outside of it. And I also think more generally that in today's world, you have to look at it with open eyes. There's some very big powers that sometimes hope for us but no longer wait for us. China, India, Brazil, the US. It's definitely in our interests, the Brits and the other Europeans, to stick together. It's in our interest.
Les Britanniques et les autres Européens à être ensemble, c'est notre intérêt.